we have three kind of modes of currency. We have money, we have time, and we have our energy.
Welcome to Mom Boss Central. I'm your host, Alexia Hoffman. This podcast is where entrepreneurial moms like you and me come together for real and raw conversations filled with practical tips, genuine stories, and a whole lot of girl power. But it's not just about listening, it's about building a community. If you haven't already, make sure to join at mombosscentral.com. So whether you're sipping on a cup of coffee, pouring yourself a glass of wine, or tuning in on the go, get ready to join the conversation and become part of our supportive Mom Boss Central community. All right, Lindsey, welcome to the show. I am so happy to have you on. Will you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I am Lindsey Konchar. I am a financial therapist. I am also a mama of two. I have a 2.5-year-old and an almost 1.5-year-old. And so we are truly kind of in the thick of the toddler years, but also
Yes.
loving it.
Yes.
And yeah.
That is amazing. Talk to me about how you got into the business space that you did. I mean, that's such a unique space, and especially being a woman, I feel like, women in finance and financial literacy can be so overwhelming. So talk to me about how you ended up there.
Yeah, so I've been a licensed therapist for 5 years, and then my husband and I actually have been kind of on our own financial wellness journey for about 8. So very early on in our relationship, I was like, I don't know anything about money. If we want to like get married and stay married, we should probably learn about money. And so we did.
Yeah.
And so then it was just over a year ago, I learned that financial therapy was an actual thing. And so I was like, this sounds like something I would be very interested in.
Yeah.
And turns out because I have a master's in social work, I was qualified to get the certification, and I went through the program and I got certified and then ended up here. And it's a perfect kind of combination. So I still do like behavioral therapy, but then I align it with like financial coaching. So essentially, like we do dig into your numbers and talk about your money habits and all that kind of stuff. And so it's just kind of a gentle approach of understanding like there's so many behaviors and emotions tied up into money and how we, spend it and save it and invest it, all the things. And
Yeah.
to kind of merge the two is a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that you and your husband started that early in your relationship, because I feel like that is such a huge piece in relationships. That's not something that's on the checklist, so to speak, of what you talk about when you're dating, right? Like you figure out if your religion and your politics and all of that is in alignment pretty early on just through natural conversation. But finances is something that I think has a little more stigma around it. So, talk to me about what that looked like for you personally going through that journey and how the experience was.
Yeah, I think it's really important to first, I will say, approach your partner with curiosity, right? I knew that my money story growing up was entirely different than how my husband was raised around money.
Yeah.
My parents ultimately did get a divorce, and money had a lot to do with that. My husband's parents are still together, um, and they talk about money a little bit more. And just so the way he and I approach money is so different because of, I will say, there's two bodies of research out there. One says that your money habits are established by the time you're 7 years old. The other says by the time you're 9. I comfortably say by the time you are 10 years old, your money habits are established. And so
Wow.
the good news about habits is they can always be changed, right? And so that is something that I do a lot of work around. But unless you are intentionally trying to change those habits, then they won't be changed. And so
Yeah.
really understanding again, like where you came from, where your partner came from, and how to merge that. And so he and I were on a road trip, and quite literally, I just said, I think we really need to start talking about money and how it works. And like, let's get a book and listen to it on, Audible or whatever. So we did, and we would like ask each other some of these questions, like, how do you see the world with this lens? And,
Yeah.
and it's not like I could just snap my fingers and change the way I approach things or the way he approaches things. And it's a lot of, again, curiosity, of being vulnerable, being like, hey, I don't think I've ever really learned about money. What do you know
Yeah.
about it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge. I love that you said that you have to be intentional with changing those patterns, because I think sometimes it can feel like, oh, I learned about it. And so now information is going to create change, but that's not normally how it is. It's like intentional action is what changes our behavior, not just the knowledge around it. And I think that's something I've struggled. And, my husband and I have very, very different perspectives on money and just our mindset around it. Like you said, I think upbringing is a huge part of that. And so it has been a tough point in our relationship, but also such a great thing because we have such a different outlook on it. We are very complementary in that sense, but with that, it can create tension. So talk to me about, what advice you have for someone who struggles in the department of conversations around money with a spouse.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I always say lead again with vulnerability. So if you, and this is what I most often see with the couples that I work with, anytime they're fight or anytime they are talking about money, it's really a fight because so and so bought too much at Target, or so and so had too many Amazon packages delivered, or
Yeah.
this is something I often see new moms and dads or whatever are together, and dad's hobbies never really changed. He's still out golfing, he's still out hunting, he's still out kind of doing the things that he's always done. And
Yeah.
mom is no longer spending money on herself, and in she's spending money and all of her time with the baby. And that shows up. And I always say, we have three kind of modes of currency. We have money, we have time, and we have our energy. And if
That's
those
so
things
good.
aren't aligned, it's less of a fight about the money. It's more of a fight about how you're communicating about it and how you are prioritizing things. And
That's
unless
huge.
partners have talked about those things, you're going to continue to fight about it.
Yeah, wow, that is so huge. I love everything that you just said. I feel like those two main points need to be like very normalized in conversation because you're right. I think as a new mom, I mean, it's just so easy to let those hobbies that we're used to go because, right, before we hopped on, breastfeeding and the time constraints that are required of us as moms, it's just not the same with our partners, no matter how hard they try. It's not their fault, but the time constraint's just different. And I learned that kind of backwards. We had our twins first and then our singleton. And with the twins, it was like we were both all in 100% because we both had a baby in a hand. Nobody had a free minute. It was just, we're both in this. But with one, it was such a different experience of me, especially because we didn't introduce a bottle right away and all these other factors of like, wow, I guess with one, it's so different on what's expected of us that I didn't experience the first time around. So talk to me about those conversations and what they could or should look like for a new mom who's maybe listening to this podcast, want to start the conversations, but don't know necessarily how to begin.
I think the very best place to start is, hey, I was listening to this podcast and there was a financial therapist on there, and she made some of these comments that I thought was really interesting. And it made me think, we've never talked about money in like a calm, right? It's like, it always
Yeah.
feels like a heated discussion between us. And it made me realize, like, we actually can use money to unite us or to divide us. And I would like to unite us. So how do we do that? Like, can we talk more about that?
Yeah.
And again, like using those I statements, right? Instead of like, well, you always spend on this, and like automatically defenses go up. Nobody
Yeah.
wants to feel like they're shame and blame and doom and gloom. And so if you can say, like, it made me realize, I wasn't taught money in school. My parents did fight about money, or they just didn't talk about money. And
Yeah.
I put this pressure on myself to really understand how it works without ever having any class or learning anything about it, And
Yeah.
so what has your experience been? And like, can we find a time? Like, now might not be a good time. Holding a baby, we're trying to do bedtime, all the things. But could we find a time to like just do a money date where maybe we hire a babysitter and we just talk about it for a half hour, an hour, we go for a walk and
Yeah.
we chat about some of this stuff? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's huge. And yeah, like you said, I mean, it's just so hard because a lot of us are never taught, or what we're taught isn't necessarily the right way to think about it. Not that there's always a black and white, but sometimes it can feel very misleading when we grew up, at least for me, like a certain way that I thought was normal. And then to marry someone whose normal was a complete 180 from mine, there's just natural points of difference that come up and that we experience. So, as a woman in business and an entrepreneur, I feel like something that I really struggled with was I was always of the mindset like I'm going to work harder and make more money. And my husband was like, "Okay, you still need to save that money. Like it doesn't matter." And so I wonder if anybody listening maybe struggles with that as well of I have worked hard. I want to spend the money on what I want to spend the money on. Obviously my husband and I have talked through this over the years, but what are your thoughts on that? I mean, for someone who has worked really hard to make their own financial decisions so that they don't have to be quote unquote reliant on someone else, how can that narrative change, or what should we be considering if we're someone struggling with that narrative?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is what I will say. I have worked with people making $40,000 a year, couples making $40,000 a year, and I've worked with couples making $400,000 a year. Your money habits are your money habits at
Mm,
every pay scale.
yeah.
So just because you're working harder, you're grinding it out, you're in the hustle, and you're
Yeah.
making more money, you're right. Your spending is just going to amplify whatever it
Mhm.
already was doing. Same with your
Yeah.
saving, same with your investing. And so it just the debt gets deeper, right? Like
Mm,
and so or the investing gets better, right? And
yeah.
so it
Yeah.
just you have to kind of look at that and realize like, oh wow, I want to ultimately change how and you might have to do like a full overhaul of how you've
Mhm.
approached money, what you think to be true about money, what,
Yeah.
the money messages, we call them money scripts that were said to you, like, oh, we can't afford that, when in fact you could afford it. It actually just wasn't a priority to buy that.
Yeah. That's
And I
huge.
talk to my kids specifically in the language of priorities. So, like,
Mm.
my 3.5-year-old, if we're at the store and she says, Mommy, I want this toy, I say, oh, we're just not prioritizing that right now. But we are prioritizing our trip down to Texas to go visit your cousins. And
Mm.
that's an
That's
exciting
huge.
way that she's still attached to, right? I wanted her to like build in these ideas that like money doesn't have to be a no, 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 no. We're not like
Yeah.
depriving her of anything. But you have $1 and it gets to do one thing. It's not going to go to the
Yeah.
toy and to Texas, right? And so having her understand where our priorities are currently lying and how that influences her and how it impacts, them. So we'll have like a full family day. We're like,
Yeah.
oh, this is what mommy and daddy are thinking. We want your opinions. And my 1.5-year-old like crawling right, right. My 3-year-old's like, I want a snack. I'm like,
Yeah.
perfect. But we
Yeah.
want to get in those habits when they are 10 and 12, and
Mm.
it makes a little bit more of a impact on their life and how we've just been doing this forever. We've always talked about it openly as a family. And
Yeah.
how can we, what do you want to do while you're in Texas to make it really fun? Oh, mommy, I want to go for a horseback ride. Perfect. We'll go for a
Yeah.
pony ride when we're in Texas.
Yeah, I love that. I think that how you phrase that of we're not prioritizing the toy right now, but we're prioritizing the other thing that you are spending the money on, I think that's huge. And I've never heard anyone talk about that. But again, I'm not like deep in this space. So I'm just excited that you shared that here because I think that it's like those small tweaks that make such a huge difference in, the transitional generation is what my husband and I talk about. It's like, just being intentional about how we are raising our kids and that we're all doing the best that we can, but putting ourselves in a new space and new information that our parents maybe weren't given the opportunity to learn about it in the same context that we are, but the research that's out there now and the information that's out there, like changing those phrases alone can have such a powerful impact in their relationship and their money habits. But you saying that by 10, money habits are formed, that's just so powerful to hear because that's not something I knew. I mean, there's a lot of things that our kids are learning, but that wasn't something that was on my radar as, oh, yeah, I need to be really conscious of what my 6-year-old is. I don't have a 6-year-old yet, but you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that, what my 6-year-old is going to be learning about money is just so crazy to me.
And they're watching, right? I mean, we know this is true across the board with kids. They are constantly absorbing what you're doing, what you're saying, how you're acting, your facial
Yeah.
expressions, all this stuff. So if they only see one person, oftentimes it's dad paying the bills or doing this or whatever, getting frustrated, yelling at mom for,
Mm-hmm.
racking up the credit card debt again or whatever it looks like. They're seeing that, they're absorbing that. And so,
Yeah.
again, for us as women entrepreneurs, it's really important to have a seat at the table and to have those open conversations. Now, I'm not
Mm.
saying one person can't be in charge of paying the bills. Sure, of
Mm-hmm.
course. My husband and I do monthly money dates. Sometimes we're like deep in the numbers and we're like, how are we? Are we on track for our goals? Right?
Yeah.
Everything for me and what I do with my clients is all goal oriented. So
Mm.
establishing those short-term goals and all the way to the long-term goals and
Yeah.
evaluating how that's going. But sometimes we just have fun money dates where, like, I'll give you an example. In November, we had a very heavy, so several months ago, had a very heavy numbers date. And numbers is like not my husband's favorite thing. He is
Mm-hmm.
just not that guy. I'm that girl, like I love it.
Yeah.
And he was just kind of like, I don't know, like it seems more bleak. And I'm like, what do you mean bleak? Like, this is freaking awesome. And like this and
Yeah.
that, whatever.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I can kind of see where he's coming from though, because you do have to make choices. What are we prioritizing this month,
Mm-hmm.
this year, right?
Yeah. Definitely.
And so in December, I said, look, we're not even going to look at the numbers. We're not going to evaluate any of that. I'm going to go and get a couple scratch offs. We never do this. I'm like, I don't even know how to order a scratch off from the gas station, but whatever. But I was like, I'm going to do that. And in 2 hours, when the kids are down, we're going to sit down and we're just going to talk about these three things. If we had an influx of cash, $10,000, if we won $100,000, and if we won $1,000,000, what would we do with it? And those
I
questions,
love
and
it.
we talked about, each of our things, and then we did the scratch off. We won all of $0. But that wasn't the point. It didn't matter to me that I had
Yeah.
wasted $20 on scratch offs. Who cares? What
Yeah.
mattered to me was having a deeper understanding of, again, his priorities, what he would do with an influx of cash. I learned that his number one spot in the whole world that he would want to go to is Greece, which he is like number one hunter, fisher, like rugged guy. And I'm like, Greece? A beach? Like, what
Yeah.
do you mean? So
Yeah.
it
That's
was like
awesome.
funny. And now we like joke about it. And so
Yeah.
there's fun ways to go about having a money date and doing it that, like, yeah, of course you have to hit the numbers at some point, but
Yeah.
also you don't have to start with that.
I love hearing you say a money date because my husband and I do financial check-in once a month where we go through every single account. We look at all of our investments. We look at our, all the numbers. I hate the numbers. I'm not the
Yeah.
numbers person, right? I'm your husband in that scenario. But
Mhm.
we have like our marriage business weekly meeting. So we just go through our schedule and our budget and all that. So we talk about money a lot. I mean, every week we talk about our budget, and then every month we actually sit down and look at the numbers and all the things. And my husband is saver champion. I mean, like he has so many different savings account. The automated stuff is being saved, and I don't even know what we're saving. I mean, like it's so far beyond me. But to hear you talk about it like that is my type of money experience because I love to ask like the dreamer questions of like, okay, where is your heart at with money even? And for him, like a lot of the time, I do feel like I can predict what he'll say, right? Like, okay, if we had $1 million, what would you want to do? He'd want to buy more real estate. Like that's our life. It's all real estate all the time. But to hear, how you can tweak those questions and change it and like to have the three scales, that would be such a fun way to like go deeper than what we have to talk about. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Because I think so much of the time it's like, this is our current situation. What is realistic? But like to go outside of that, I think is so cool. So I love that you shared that. I definitely am going to steal that idea, do it one of these times. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no, please do it. Report back because I love it. I think that is such a good and new parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere in adulthood, we stop really dreaming a lot
Yeah.
anyway, but especially when you become a parent. Like it's just
Mm-hmm.
like it all goes out the window. And to like
Yeah.
really intentionally create that time and space to do that together, environment matters. I had a couple, a mom and a dad. Dad wanted to do the money date in his office at the house. And she was
Mm-hmm.
like, you know what? That just like kind of feels icky to me. I want to do it comfortably in our living room. I want to get a glass of wine. What can I get you to drink? And it felt to her like when they talked to me about it the next time I met with them, she was like, it just felt neutral. Like it didn't feel like I
Mm.
was in his space on his
Yeah.
computer. They used her laptop. And she had enough self-awareness to say, like, I think I think I need this instead. And he was
Yeah.
super receptive to it and was like, oh, cool, let's do that. And they ended up having, I call it a dreaming session. They had such a good dreaming session. They truly laid out their goals so, so well. And I always tell couples, like, yes, you are in a partnership. Your goals as a partnership matters, your goals as a family matter, but you are still individuals. And
Mhm.
I had a goal of buying my first pair of Christian Louboutins. I wanted them. I did it. My
Yeah.
husband has a goal of going on a guided hunt. That has
Yeah.
nothing to do with me, right? So
Yeah.
we have everything situated so we can dream for big goals, like how we're sending our kids to college,
Yeah.
to what we want on how many date nights a month we're going on,
Mhm.
to what he wants to do in his free time and how I want to spend my money on in my time, you know?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think having those distinctions is really important too.
Yeah, I love that you said that too, and like how it can feel hard to dream. I am definitely the dreamer. Like, I have no problem saying, like, if I had a million, if someone handed me $1 million, like, that's easy. But I think it's important too to give him that space and hear what's on his heart, because I think a lot of the times it's like, okay, like, I think his mindset is like, "Oh, we have kids, we're very limited." I'm like, "No, we're not limited." But then it's like, "Okay, how about this? Let's do that." He's like, "Yeah, that sounds good." But I don't really give him that space to dream too. So I feel like that's something that I'm just hearing you talk, reflecting on about, how can it be a fun way to talk about it where it's not so forced and like dreary of like, "Oh, we're never going to do this because we have all these little babies right now." But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's awesome. Talk to me about how you have transitioned your business. You have two littles, I mean, pretty close together, it sounds like. I mean, I'm in that space too, but tell me about how you managed to transition your business at the same time and how you've prioritized your business while also having these little babies running around.
Yeah. I was working, doing outpatient therapy in a clinic. And then I found out a month before the pandemic that I was pregnant with my first. And so it was very much like you're furloughed, you're going home. And
Mm.
this is when we were still like wiping down groceries. And I was like, what could this do to the baby? So I became a
Yeah.
stay at home mom. Well, 6 months before I was even a mom.
Yeah.
And about 9 months in, I talk very openly about this all the time. I had a really bad postpartum depression,
Mm.
anxiety, and postpartum rage. And the thing about it was I'm the therapist. So
Mhm.
I was like, and I've always been cool as a cucumber. I've never really experienced these like really crazy. My husband is the more anxious one in our relationship,
Mm.
or was. And I remember distinctly when I was like 8 months pregnant coming to him and saying, like, men can experience postpartum issues also,
Mhm.
and you're gonna probably feel really anxious and blah blah blah. No, not how it was. And so I knew at that point I was a stay-at-home mom. It had been 9 months. I was losing myself, and I
Yeah.
knew I needed something. I didn't want to
Mhm.
go back though to the clinic I was working at. It was great. It was far away, so I would have been away from my baby so long. And for me, I knew that daycare wasn't it for me. I was like, I want
Mhm.
to do something. So I found a happy medium where I'm very lucky. My mom came over every Tuesday for 3 years, and I could just go and like work on something and build
Mhm.
this like little tiny baby business.
Yeah.
Um, Fast forward, I was not a financial therapist then, but then when I got the certification, I was like, okay, this is it. And so we've really done a good job of kind of using like block scheduling. So now I have my mom on Tuesdays and my husband, my mother-in-law on Mondays. And those are kind of like my two work days. I'm home with the kids otherwise.
Mhm.
I get 4 hours in the day and then I wake up really early. I'm up at like
Yeah.
5 a.m. getting work done before the kids are up. And so I do these little things knowing that, again, financially we put ourselves in a position where we don't need my income. It is certainly helpful,
Mhm.
um but I don't have to put all this pressure on myself. Like if I'm not providing,
Yeah.
we're in really bad shape. And so we really intentionally created runway for us to make sure that like if something happens, right, how that all works. And I again attribute that to doing the work with the money,
Yeah.
um, really early on, but also really intentionally to say, like, we don't know what our life is going to look like. Maybe one day I am going to want to go back into an office with people and whatever.
Mm.
I don't really see that happening, but I want to, the thing to me is like the number in the bank does not matter. It is so irrelevant to me. The number in the bank means options. And that's what I care about, that we have the
Yeah.
option to have the flexibility to do what it is that we want to do that's right for our family,
Yeah.
instead of constantly feeling like I have to do this because this is the only option.
Yeah,
Right.
that's huge. I think that
Mhm.
I love that you said that, because I think we forget sometimes. It can be easy to look at a number and set a goal for a number, and we forget what that means. Like, I don't know, when I go through coaching, it's like you talk about a goal. Well, what would that goal actually do for you? Because really, at the end of the day, the goal is great, but I mean, the goal is there because you're looking for something from it. And I think that's the same with money. So
Mhm.
I love that. And I also love that you said you were able to start this business with 3 hours a week. I think that's huge. Like, that is amazing. And I think that is such a huge light of hope for someone listening who is like a mom who's struggling to find time for herself. And, you know, the thought of hiring childcare can feel so overwhelming. But with 3 hours a week, you're able to start your business. That is so cool. Talk to me about how you felt. Like, I think a lot of people would say, oh, I only have 3 hours a week. I can't really do anything with that. How did you shift your mindset so you were like, I'm starting this business. All I need is 3 hours a week, and I'm going to make it work?
Yeah, for me, again, it was just like, I need to get out. I need to get out of the house. And I was exclusively breastfeeding. I never bottle fed my baby. She just wouldn't take a baby. So like that was my
Mm-hmm.
window. Like that's all
Yeah.
I got.
Yeah.
Um, and I have pivoted a lot. And I think to anybody who's like still kind of in the early stages of building their business, like I went from, I wrote and published a book. That was what I did with those 3 hours. It's like, I'm just going to go to the library and write. Like,
Mm,
it was a good, healthy outlet for me. I knew I could
yeah.
not reach one-to-one at that point, but one-to-many.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the first thing. Then I was like, well, maybe I could do this, like, postpartum coaching, where like I've kind of gotten, when the cloud for me had kind of lifted, I was
Mm-hmm.
like, that's something I felt so incredibly passionate about, to help other postpartum women not
Yeah.
feel so alone and isolated. And then that was going well for quite a while, but I was like, we're complete. Our family's good. We're happy. I'm not having any more children. I don't want to be in that postpartum space still. It was a really good spot
Mm,
for me to be in for a year, and helping other women through that. But I was like, this isn't my long-term plan. I don't want to be 40 and still helping postpartum women when I can't even really, like,
yeah.
honestly, it was such a fog that I'm like, I don't even know if
Yeah.
I'm going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Um, and so when I found like financial therapy, I was like, that I had a visceral response. It's like, I know that that is what I should be doing.
Yeah.
I'm good at it. I know therapy, I know money, but I didn't know business, and I invested in
Mm,
myself. I took a $3,000 chance on myself and started
mm-hmm.
learning about business and how it could actually operate. And that was really big to, that's a lot of money to be like, oh
Yeah.
my God,
Heck
like, what
yeah.
if it doesn't work out? But I was like, you know what? I have all the faith that it will.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm going to learn something.
Yeah.
um, and so I think, yeah, I created the room that I needed to create. And it wasn't like, yeah, I had 3 hours like all at once on that Tuesday, but I was still like, I have a blog. So I was blogging in the evenings or in the
Mm-hmm.
mornings when I would wake up, and just filling those times a little bit. I'm also really good at seeing dirty dishes on my counter and being like, tonight's problem,
Yeah.
tomorrow's problem, and
Yeah.
prioritizing my business because it meant so much to me as like an outlet.
I
Whereas like,
love
yeah, I
that.
should be doing the dishes. That's
They'll still be there.
They'll still be there. It's
I
okay.
think that's huge, though, prioritizing your business over those tasks. I think that is like so hard and so important as a mom, right? To say, like, my business hat is coming before my housekeeper hat. Like, it sounds so simple, but it's
Hmm.
hard to do. And I think that is like a key to success, is to be able to say, like, that can wait. Because I know for me, like, I will feel resentful. I'm like cleaning up the dishes, like, oh, I want to be working on my business right now. Like, why am I doing that? Like, why don't I just leave the damn dishes till tomorrow?
Yeah,
I don't
you
know.
can. And the thing is too, what I will say is I put it on my calendar. Like,
Mm,
it was a non-negotiable, and I tell my clients this all the time. You can tell me what your priorities are. Great. Give me your calendar and give me your bank statements, and I will tell
mm,
you what your priorities are, because
oof.
those two things tell a lot about a person.
Yeah.
And on my calendar, every Thursday was like the library. Like, it was
Mm,
a bike ride away. That's what I was, or excuse me, every Tuesday, that's what I was doing. And I knew like it was set in stone. And it's so easy to say like, okay, well, I'm going to do this. But unless you like have that, like that small
Yeah.
amount of accountability,
Yes.
and then the family knew like that's a way that my husband and I communicate is our
Yeah.
calendar.
Same.
Non-negotiable. I was going, he knew it. He knew he
Yeah.
needed to be home. Like that's how it works. So
Yeah, I love that you said that because my husband and I also speak through calendars, and that is a huge part of our life. So much so that he took down like our entryway artwork and put whiteboards of calendars. I'm like, we use a digital calendar. He's like, I want the meal plan. I'm like, okay, whatever. But my calendar, like I do live by that, but I also found myself like if I put it on my calendar but I didn't leave my house, it wouldn't get done. Like I had to. Like it wasn't enough if I was in my office at my house and I could hear everything going on. I was like, okay, I'm not able to focus. So I have to leave. And I felt like guilt for that for a bit. Like, why do I not want to be around my kids? Like, oh, that's so wrong. It's like, no, like of course I can't be 100% focused. Like I'm going to show up better when my kids are not like my daughter is not with me today on the podcast. Half the time she is, half the time she isn't. Like, and I'm like, I am just able to get more done when I am not holding baby, waiting for baby to cry, catching spit up, making sure she's not choking from rolling. I mean, like all the things that we do as moms, it's like give yourself that space, whether it's 3 hours, 30 minutes, or 30 hours a week, give yourself that time to do what you need to do and don't feel shame about it so you can show up and actually get stuff done.
and I'm right there with you. Like every time I'd be biking to the library, I'd be like, God, does it make me like bad that I can't, just be a stay-at-home mom? I hate that word, but like that's how it feels.
Yeah,
It's
I
like,
hate that too.
should I be able to just be home with my kids and not
Oh my gosh.
feel bad about it? But it's like, no, I've gotten to a point now where I'm like, going on a weekend girls trip. See you
See
later.
ya.
Like
Yeah.
it feels really nice to be here. And of course it's like it's such a trip. It's always going to be. It's like, oh, I need nothing more than a break. And the minute I'm like at the airport away from my family, I'm
Oh
like,
yeah.
I miss them so much. I'm like that creepy mom that's like staring longingly at babies.
Yes.
Just like it just is. And then you
That's
just
so
have to
funny.
accept it.
Yes, that's so funny you said that. I was traveling with all my kids and my husband and our nanny. We were all traveling and I went to go get like a drink or something, like a coffee in the airport, and I left the kids with all them at the play area, and I'm like staring at this little kid and they're like, did you leave yours at home? I'm like, no, they're just down on the terminal, but I'm just watching yours because I feel guilty because I left them for 10 minutes in the airport. Like that's so funny that you said that because I can relate 100%.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, the amount of times I've been in like a hotel lobby, tears kind of streaming down my face a little
Oh
bit because I'm
yeah.
like, I just love them so much. I miss them. And like, I just can't wait to be home. And then the minute I get home, I'm like, ugh, bath
Yeah.
time's the
Yes.
worst.
Oh my gosh. I feel like that. Like I'll go out for girls and I'm like, oh, I feel guilty. And then I'm like, I get home. I'm like, why? Why do I feel guilty? Just
Yeah. Yeah.
stay out past bedtime. That's my
It's
advice
okay.
to moms. Stay out past bedtime. They're okay without you. They'll see you in the morning.
Yeah. And you know what? I will say too, I was with my first, I was so like, I'm the only one that can do this for her. I'm better at bedtime, like that
Yeah.
type of stuff. And with my second, my son, I've let go of some of that, and my husband does probably put him down for bed, I would say half the nights, and their bond is visibly so much stronger for it, and
Yeah.
my husband is so much happier
Mm.
not having this weird like sense of control and powerlessness from me, like,
Yeah.
and it's again, we know these things, but to put it in practice is really difficult, and so you have to meet yourself where you're at. But I think giving yourself that space to be able to say like, no, he needs to learn, and even if it's not the way that I'm going to do it, it's okay.
Yeah.
But I
Exactly.
get to serve other people in my business. I get to help them, like truly I'm like keeping marriages alive, and I'm like,
Yeah.
that's pretty important. So
Yeah.
I'm
That's
gonna do
amazing.
that while you put the kid to bed tonight.
Yeah.
Like it's all
Exactly.
right.
Yeah, my husband has said, like, when you say no from letting me help, you're keeping me from like doing you a service. And that's like, I'm keeping him from feeling good about that, And I think
Yeah.
that's something like to try to reframe my mind because it's like, no, I know he's doing a lot. I don't want to ask for help. But then I'm like resentful. So it's like, yeah, just let him help and he's going to figure it out. Like, they're not going to die, right? Like for Mother's Day, my mom and I sat on the back deck and he had all three of the babies. And I was like, okay, we're here, like they're not gonna die, and like it's okay if I hear them screaming inside. Like we're gonna play cards and have a glass of wine and everything's gonna be fine. And if you need us, we're here, but he can handle it and he can do it Miss Rachel was on. They were the high chairs for longer than I'd like. I'm like, okay, it's fine. It's all good. We're going to enjoy the day. So I love that. I think that is a huge piece. And I love that we're talking about normalizing that, because I think it can feel so shameful to like say that, but I think it does need to be normalized. So I love that we're talking about it. Well, Lindsey, this conversation has been so fun. I feel like we could talk forever. You are just awesome. But tell our listeners where they can connect with you and what services you offer.
Yeah. So like I said, I'm a financial therapist. I do one-on-one therapy, so with individuals and with couples. So if your partner isn't totally on board, I can still just work with you. That is great. And I'm coping with Lindsey.com. I'm also coping with Lindsey on Instagram, and I'm still a one-woman show. So I love when people pop in a DM, say, "Hey, I heard you on this podcast." If you have questions, money related, my whole thing is shame-free living, right? Like shame-free motherhood, shame-free money, shame-free marriage. There's just way too much pressure that we've been putting on ourselves, and I am here to alleviate some of that. And so however I can support, that's the goal. That's what I'm here to do. So
I love it. So amazing. So amazing. Thank you so much for being on. Thank you for being part of the Mom Boss Central community. And thank you for the work you're doing. It is so, so great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Mom Boss Central. I hope you found inspiration, encouragement, and maybe even a few new strategies to rock your mom boss journey. Remember, you're not alone. We're all in this together. And don't forget to share the love with your fellow mom bosses. Make sure to join the community at mombosscentral.com. It's completely free and a space to connect with like-minded women. All you have to do is sign up and start connecting. Until next time, keep pursuing your passions and living authentically. We're so happy to have you as part of the Mom Boss Central community.